Well, hey, let's jump in here.
All right, let's
So,
do it.
yeah, hey, welcome everybody. We're actually, Ben and I, through Elementum, have been doing these Friday conversations over the last, I don't know, month and a half, 2 months. And, really it's just been around this jumping into conversations that as we're talking to ministry leaders and churches, like what are some of those relevant things? And we wanted to kind of open up this conversation in terms of what's been happening in our world right now. And we thought, man, what a perfect person to come and engage our conversation with than our friend Antwuan Malone. So Antwuan, how you doing today?
I'm good, man. Thanks for the chance to chat. And
Yeah.
you guys, I love talking with you guys. Some of my
Yeah.
favorite people.
I know.
We've been joking around for the last half hour.
So. I'm like, man, we should have just started live like 30 minutes ago, and then they would have gotten all the good parts of the conversation. So cool.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about you, your ministry, your context, kind of what you're doing right now.
Yeah. Well, again, my name's Antoine Malone. I am in the Dallas area, the North Dallas area. I lead a ministry organization called Elevate. And what we do is we create and support young adult ministry. We create and support discipleship environments for young adults here in our area. And so we have a young adult ministry called Union that we are launching, that we minister to young adults in our context directly to, mostly made up of young adults who are part of churches, but those churches do not have a young adult focus. But we also create support mechanisms and networking opportunities for young adult pastors and young adult ministries that are already in flux or already going in our area. We believe that the more discipleship environments for young adults, the better. And so we want to increase the number of those and the focus of that. I also work with Threaded, which is a multicultural reconciliation organization that helps churches deal with the issues of racial reconciliation inside the body of Christ. So we are all in many ways on the front lines of trying to create materials and resources for people in churches and for the body of Christ to better engage with each other as we face racial challenges in our society. So that we can lead the way and be, lovers of our neighbors in such a way that the world is astonished and drawn into who God is and how he loves us. And so the intersection of those two things brings us together, this young adult and this this racial tension that we're now seeing brings us in. So I'm excited about both of those things and excited to share in our convo.
Yeah. And it's been good. Like, man, and we'll post some of your stuff, Antwuan, in some of the comments below, but man, Ben and I have caught some of your conversations that you've been having over the last several days. And man, we'd encourage you guys just check them out, like the page, kind of jump in some of those. They're extremely valuable in the midst of where we find ourselves right now and in kind of processing. And so just, even saw your article in Relevant the other day. That was
that was
awesome.
Fun. I guess my partner probably I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that we have a podcast called Colored Commentary. Yeah. And what Andy's referring to is for the last 21 days from June 1st to 21st, every day at 12:30, we've been kind of doing a colored commentary unplugged where we have a live podcast where we help answer questions and deal with issues of the day or surrounding race. So
that's good. Yeah, we'll post that stuff down for everybody to find, so we can try to link them up with you. So
not gonna lie, Colored Commentary is probably one of my favorite. I love that podcast title. It fits so well.
I know you feel a little scared saying this, don't you? Sometimes no, I just joking. No, we joke around about it all the time. It's a safe environment to talk about these really difficult things. So hopefully,
yeah. Which obviously, I mean, in light of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, which is just a couple hours away from where I am in North Dakota, in Fargo, and all the stuff that's kind of come out of that in the last couple of weeks is a super essential conversation topic for the moment we're in right now. So here, let's start with this question before we'll talk resources. We'll talk about, how do we disciple the young adults we're working with through these times. But first question is, how have you guys personally, how has the death of George Floyd and the stuff that's come out of that affected you personally?
Yeah, well, for me, man, there's the obvious racial tension of the moment. This idea that George Floyd uh, was unjustly killed by this police officer,
Yeah.
And that part of it is difficult to see and to stomach. Um, I think the thing though that affects me the most though, and this is probably not the answer that most people are expecting maybe, but um, I I believe deeply in the church. I believe that God has instituted the church as the hope of the world, and I believe that in a crazy year of 2021 for the book so far,
Yeah.
where we are dealing with people who are struggling with um, care and compassion and even justice now, that the voice of the church is conspicuously absent in these places where we should be leading. And I was most affected by the fact that George Floyd's death is going to inspire the public, which it did, to respond. But they're going to do so without the leadership of the church, without the leadership of the gospel, because the church has not positioned itself in such a way that society would look to it for answers or for leadership in this space. And my heart breaks more at that than it does at the death of even George Floyd in the first place.
Yeah. Yeah.
It means to me that not only will we continue potentially to lose lives in our current context, but the eternal destinies of people will continue to be unshaken or undiverted. And so on some level, George Floyd is a picture of Black people struggling to breathe under the knee of white law in America, but it is also a picture of humanity struggling to breathe under the knee of Satan. And there's not enough people on the outside who are strong enough to push the strong man. You've got people in that video who are saying, "Hey, get your knee off them." So they see something's wrong. They're even voicing that something needs to change. But there's 20 of them, and if they would have decided, you know what, all of us, we're not going to have this, and we're going to go and rush this guy and get him off of him, that then the man may be alive today. So we've got people on the outside willing to see wrong, speak to wrong, but maybe not take the chance to step into the fixing of wrong, not just not just socially, but from a Christian and a church point of view. The church is one of those things on the sideline saying, "Hey, wait, Satan, get your knee off of them." When we have the power to move Satan off of the neck of people.
That's good.
And I don't see that happening. So that's a conflict. Those are a conflict. And what am I trying to say? A connection, cross section of ideas that I see out of George Floyd.
Yeah, man, that's convicting, because I think that's for me. I feel like racial issues, racial reconciliation, that stuff has always been, for me, has been at something of a distance, kind of like, yeah, I agree, that's important, that's valuable, that's necessary, but that's over here, I'm over here. I mean, in Fargo, we're like 98 point something % white, which doesn't necessarily help my awareness personally, but with the stuff happening in Minneapolis just a few hours away, some protests and violence in the Fargo area as well, has been something of a wake-up call, conviction for me to be like, okay, like, this is something that I need to move beyond. Like, at this point, I'd say I'm at the point of like ignorance by and large. Just saying, okay, I know it's an issue, but I don't know what are the issues other than the general idea. Now, I'm guessing probably a good number of people who are going to watch this are maybe in a similar place where they're just saying, "Oh, like what's going on here?" I've maybe heard stuff, seen stuff on the news, but it hasn't necessarily connected with me personally. And sadly, as humans, it's got to connect with us personally, to wake us up.
Which I would say for me, this has been these last few months with some of these last issues that have happened, just being around in Austin, being around quite a few African American people, and to hear how they're feeling, to have even people in our church who have adopted African American children and were scared for their kids. Like I felt like it, almost like you, Ben, I feel like that it brought me close in a new way of like, no, this is a legit thing that and like you, Antoine, that's kind of where it automatically went to for me, of just saying, man, the church has to be the answer. Like we can't, yes, legislation's good. Yes. But the church is the only thing through a transformed heart is that can step in and actually make a difference in what's happening. And we've been so just kind of standing on the sidelines for lots of different reasons, where, I think it's a lot of people are feeling, I'm hoping right now, where it's our time to step in collectively as the faith community and to be the answer to how we wrestle and tackle these issues.
Yeah. I mean, and there's a couple ways to even think about that. Like the ways the church can be an answer and hope. Well, one of the ways like that looks just like psychologically, if you will, it may be that racism is not something that we can alleviate, but it should be that the church should be an example of a society that is impervious to racism. Right. So America may still at some point have racism, but the church should be something that America looks at on a consistent basis and says that is achievable, right? Because there it is, and therefore provides the hope you're talking about to continue to work in the space of alleviating racism. The church, while the church, it may be true that the church could be used as a tool to alleviate, right? But it may be good enough that we're just an example. And inside the church, Amos, God talks to Amos, or God talks to Israel through Amos. And one of the charges he says to Israel is, you look just like the cities around you. And when the cities around you peek into your walls for answers, they find the very same problems that are in their spaces. And God doesn't like that about Amos, about Israel, as he's condemning them through Amos. And it's a moment like that. I can hear the echo of such a charge on the American church at this moment, especially in the spaces of race.
So we were talking before we went live about the role of discipleship. And I mean, Antoine, you made the comment that for a lot of, if you're a young adult, leading young adult ministry, probably the majority of people in your ministry would agree that racism is an issue, that reconciliation needs to happen in some way, shape, or form. What that looks like probably is a lot of different ideas. But what do you guys think? What are some ways that we can help disciple the people that we're leading well to address these issues, so that it begins to shape the church into looking something like what's displayed, what Revelation 5, you got people from every tribe and tongue and nation there celebrating, and all on the same footing before the throne.
I think that picture is interesting, by the way, in Revelation, because their skin colors are different. That is how he knew they were from different tribes. You would think that it was like, well, how did he know there was different tribes? There's a visual that he's seeing, and and you're like, well, did they have on different clothes? Like, no, they all had on white robes. So the visual was a multicolored skin visual, and I think it's interesting that the Bible decides to include that detail as though we needed to know it, but that's neither here nor there. So your question about, moving forward with discipleship, I mentioned that a lot of young adult pastors and young adult ministries and people in young adult ministries would probably agree that this is an issue of their time, but not every one of them. Last year I did a sermon series on Amos, and I tried to talk about these things, and I lost a lot of people out of my community as a result of that. So some of the issues that we're going to have, that we're going to face, we can't take for granted, despite my saying that earlier. But we can probably take it a little more granted than we can for the sort of our older brothers and sisters. But there's 4 questions I think that every ministry leader needs to bring to their ministry community, whether that's a senior pastor of a church or whether that's a young adult pastor to a community of young adults, that maybe you could begin to ask and try to answer these questions within the context of your group, to try to position the corporate mindset toward loving our neighbor well through racism. I mean, not through racism, in the face of racism. So one of those questions is there really a problem, a racial problem? Is there really a racial problem? And now some people are going to say, no, there's not, that this is an agenda, or they find a way to say no to that answer. If they say no to that answer, then they will do nothing. And whatever it is that you're trying to put together to solve the problem, they will not participate in it, because they believe you're in a fairy tale land solving a problem in their mind that doesn't exist. So is there a problem? Let me just go through the 4 questions. Is there a problem? Am I really a part of the problem? Is the problem fixable? And am I the one to fix the problem? Now, at any point in the process, if the answer is no, then work stops.
Yeah, they're out.
Work stops. And so if you're a young adult pastor and you've got a community of young adults, it might be helpful, to have it to think through what it would take to create a room where safe conversation can be had, where disagreeable minds can express their disagreeing thoughts without trying to go at each other's necks, right? So and that's going to be your challenge. Welcome to leadership, right? But so that's part of it. You got to think through that, right? But if you can get that figured out and try to create a greenhouse for such good conversation, then it'd be healthy to answer these questions and to take some time. Maybe you don't take all 4 questions in one night. Maybe you take a little bit at a time. But I think you do need to ask the question: is racism a problem at all? And let your people work through that. And you, as the leader, bring what the Bible says about that. And the same thing with the others. Am I part of the problem? Yes. I mean, if you ask me, the answer to all questions is yes, right? But but as you're walking through, and listen, am I part of the problem as a Black man? Yes. Am I part of the problem as a white man? Yes. White woman, Hispanic, like everybody's a part of the problem, right? And then is the problem fixable? Well, the scripture says, take heart, I've overcome the world. Mm-hmm. Anyway, I don't want to give you your tools. The point is that you bring the Bible and you bring reality. You allow these people to wrestle with and come to the realization of the challenge that's right in front of them. And if they can realize that it's a real challenge, that they are part of the problem, that the problem can be solved, and accept their responsibility toward fixing that problem, now you got something. And so once you got that figured out, now you can start thinking through what are the now that we all know that we're fighting for the same things and we're all seeing the picture exactly the same way, now let's figure out what we need to do next to take back this ground that the enemy has gained. Yeah. And so some really practical, I think, at least skeleton, if you will, of some questions that you can take through your people. And it'll be a journey and all of that.
Yeah. And I think that's, and I wish we could have I know we don't have time to get into the conversation that we had before, but before we jumped on, but like the reminder that that's a discipleship issue, right? Like
Absolutely.
a lot of times what we think the answer to is let's gather large crowds, and that is somehow going to sway the hearts of the majority or the people or the masses.
Yeah.
But what we see over and over again is those questions you walk through. Yes, you can do them on a corporate level, but we got to get down into the nitty gritty, into life on life, and wrestle with those questions with people.
Absolutely.
That's where the change and the momentum happens. So I think even as we look at the church's inability to be a part of the solution of some of these issues, I would argue it's because our discipleship is broken. Like because we have broken discipleship, we're not able to get into the nitty gritty of life and walk alongside people in those questions that you were posing to us of what that looks like. But we just want to kind of do it from, which I'm not anti big gathering or, but I feel like it needs to be like we've negated that life on life discipleship. And that's been part of the issue though.
Yeah, I think that's perfect, man. I mean, because the questions, you can have those questions with you and your wife, or maybe you're not married, but or you and your best friend, or a room. Like they fit everywhere. And let me say this, because this is also very important to that whole strategy. We can't be so arrogant to think that our lens will give us the answer to the question alone. But we have to pursue God's answer to these questions, not our own perception. Yeah. And that might mean that we have to bring the question to people who aren't like us and develop a sense of humility and curiosity to really start to think outside of the box that we're in. It won't do any good for a bunch of Ku Klux Klan members to sit down and say, is racism a problem for us? And they're like, well, yeah, but yeah, in a whole nother kind of way, right? You know, without having someone outside of their thinking, at least contributing to the conversation enough for them to challenge ideas that are incorrect, or even further shape those ideas that are correct so that they are more complete. You know, so it's important that, again, young adult leader, that if you're a Black pastor and you want to have this conversation with your Black audience, bring in white people or a white pastor or someone with an alternative point of view intentionally to challenge and to shape and to be the iron that sharpens iron, if you will, and to allow that. If you don't do that, if you do these conversations in a bubble, then you're going to find the answers that you all want to have, and which most people don't want to do anything about it. So they're looking for no to be the answer to the question. Yeah. And they're looking for a reason for it to be no, so.
Which also assumes, and you talk about that, Antoine, it also assumes the humility to say, I may not know everything. My position may not be right. I need to hear from other people, which I think is huge. An entire different conversation of just like, are we even as believers willing to say, my position may not be right, and I actually need to invite other people in to speak into that would challenge that and help shape that and allow me to question it and be okay with that. I think in a lot of ways we say, no, what I believe is right, and so I don't want to hear from anybody else.
And I did the Bible study. I know the answer.
And remember, God is part of the conversation. So bring the Bible in. One of the reasons, when you think about the minor prophets, which we don't preach a lot, which this moment is suffering greatly. As a church, we're suffering greatly because we have not studied the minor prophets well. There's nobody, I don't want to get on this soapbox, but there's not many people preaching about Hosea, Jeremiah, not 29:11. I'm talking about Jeremiah, all 52 chapters of it, right? There's more than one verse in Jeremiah. But Jeremiah, Hosea, the Israelites are hearing the prophets and they just don't want to believe the prophets. That's why there's so many of them. They're just like, yeah, you're not really talking to us. And Amos is like, yeah, man, I'm talking to y'all. and the church is like, and Israel's like, nah, we're not that bad. Amos is like, no. He's been doing, it's been this bad for a while. He said this and he said this and he said this. No, that wasn't really it. Amos is like, no, really. He told me this in a vision and over and over, over and over, the church is resistant to hearing what God is calling them to because they think they're too arrogant. They think that they have it figured out. That what they're doing isn't bad enough, that God would be angry, but it's just good enough to pass the bar. And we have to allow the Bible, and again, young adult pastor, you're going to want to do the study to allow the Bible to speak into the conversation, and contribute to the conversation in a way that moves us toward God's will for it.
I love that. I think that's a great starting place to say, hey, let's engage well with the minor prophets. Because I think most of the people who are, if you're leading a young adult ministry, you probably have some sort of value of like God's word is truth. But there is a tendency, I know I'm reading through the Bible with a couple young adults locally here, and most of them, man, we've had some good and challenging conversation about some of the stuff when you get to not only Deuteronomy, where it's like, this is not exciting reading, but
Deuteronomy is good, right around 30, 28, 29, 30. Yeah, that'll work. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
But, so there's all this stuff where the tendency I find for the younger people that I'm working with is that they probably, even if they've grown up in church, they've probably never read the Old Testament. Other than, like you're saying, the little snippets out of there that sound good or good sound bites. So that's, talk about a great starting place is say, take some of your young adults and say, hey, let's read through some of these, or you as a leader, read through some of these Old Testament chunks of scripture that don't get much engagement because they're maybe a little bit harder to interpret or take a little bit more work to connect with.
And you know what that does? What that does is it lifts the Bible up as relevant to life.
Yeah.
Suddenly people begin to see, wow, I did not know the Bible even talked about that. That it had something to say. The entire book of Amos, for instance, there's no talk about the law in Amos.
Mm-hmm.
You know, Amos in no way addresses the people's way of dealing with the Old Testament law. Everything in Amos has to do with social issues and how they deal with each other socially. It's an entirely socially, God is judging them socially in Amos as his people and how they interact with each other. And who knew that in the Bible, there's an entire book dedicated to the social actions of Israel and how they should eliminate things and how they should approach things and how we as God's people, the new Israel, might need to find ourselves in that story, you know? And so we've got to be able to, you know, in a time when the Bible is losing credibility in the eyes of many young adults, mostly because they don't feel like it has anything real to say to our current moment, it's time to go back and reveal that it does, that God saw it coming. And that he gave us tools to use to interface the current cultural moment.
Good. Let's do this. We got just a couple more minutes left, but I would love to hear from each of us. What are maybe one or two resources, and we can post links to some of these in the comments on Facebook. One or two resources that you say this is a good place to start if you're a leader.
Okay. So for in the space of racial reconciliation, one of the best books, if you're a reader, which I think, even if you're not a reader, I think this is just be good, is a book called Divided by Faith. I'll need to look up the author because I don't have the author in my head at the moment.
I'll look it up here while I talk.
Yeah, but Divided by Faith is a great starting place. It talks about the issue of race and the role of the church together. And gives us a chance to, in a sense, put the spiritual lens on top of the racial issue.
Yeah.
So that's a good book to start with. You know, sheepishly, I would recommend going to wearethreaded.org/resources, mostly because, again, as an organization, what we're trying to do is compile resources for people. And so there's a whole set of videos and video references and books there. Even certain movies are great starting places. You know, you can look at the movie Remember the Titans and just decide to look at it as a research project on some level, entertaining one as it will be, and just invite conversation out of the movie. PBS has some documentaries that are great. You know, the African Americans. There's a documentary about the Chinese exchange. I forget what it's called. I have to write that one out. I'll submit that to you.
Yeah.
But the one about the Chinese thing, it actually talks about everything and gives us a good history of where we are as a country and how it all played in. So a lot of these resources are good places to start to get context for where we are, to understand the foundation upon which the problem that we currently face is built. And then I'll throw in colored commentary to podcast, mostly again because we put ourselves as a resource, as a Christian resource for helping you understand some of the basic problems holding up racism in our country, and some of the Christian ways maybe we can navigate conversations and bring ourselves together to solve them. So those are some resources that will produce other resources for you.
Yeah. I think for me, the two, one, Q Media, which is Gabe Lyons, they do annual conferences and stuff, but they just made, I think it's about 20 videos, each of like 5 to 20 minute clips of conversations around race, that stuff that they've recorded from conferences over the last several years. Got Dr. John Perkins, Lecrae, you name it. They got a whole wide array of stuff on there, and that's free, I think, for the next couple months. To access. Normally you have to pay to access their media site. So we'll share the link to that. And then I just started reading, but man, I'm like 3 chapters in, super convicting and inspiring book. It's The One Blood by Dr. John Perkins. conversations on race and the church. So
Yeah,
the two things that I found helpful.
Yeah, I feel like for me, it's like, I feel like I'm just at the beginning of this journey of resources. You know, like in a lot of ways, I feel like that's where I'm at a space that's in. Like even our college pastor, Mitchell Johnson, who is African American, he gave some of us the assignment to read letters to a Birmingham jail, Dr. King, as kind of the starting point. You know, so that's my next one on the read, is just a way to learn and listen, and you know. So.
Yeah, we've got with Threaded, we built an entire 10-week small group study curriculum around that book.
Nice.
That we take diverse groups through.
I'll have to add that to my list too.
Yeah. So yeah, those are great starting places. And let me also add one more resource: someone different than you. You know, like just call somebody who you trust and who you feel would be safe, that you have some relational equity with, maybe, and ask tough questions and be humble. Be humble in your asking. You know, hey, I just need to know this, and you know, I'm just going to give you this one tip, and I'm not sure, we probably just got a couple more minutes, but let me just give you this tip in those conversations, because those could be difficult conversations. Come to the conversation with a spirit of humility and curiosity. Humility and curiosity. Curiosity is about asking questions. That's what it is. It's not about making a statement. It's not about making a point. It's not about defending oneself. When you're coming into those conversations, what you're asking is, what do you feel? And if you are making a statement, you're saying, I think I see it this way. What do you think? Right? Mm-hmm. But you're always coming in with a sense of humility. If you can do that, you will have a defenseless conversation, and you'll get you'll get further quicker. If you come in without a spirit of humility, then 60 to 70% of the conversation will be about dropping down a defense that someone has put up, you know, and the sense of attack. And you don't want to create that. So in these difficult conversations, enter them with humility. Some things you're going to agree with, some things you're not going to agree with. That's fine. But ask the questions, you know, and be curious, and develop the relationship as a safe one. And it'll get you a long way. You'll create some relational equity, and then you can walk through things together.
That's good.
That's really good.
Well, I think that's,
yeah.
Is that all we got, guys?
Well, I think we can keep going, but I don't know. No, I think that's I feel like that's a good starting point, you know. And here's my hope. I you know, my prayer and my hope is that it seems like these conversations are cyclical every time something happens, you know. But how do we like keep going in a sustainable way? Like you know, a lot of people can run out of the blocks like super fast, you know, and then like tail off. But is there a way that we can kind of like, even in our reading and our learning, look at the long game of this and just be like, okay, I don't want to burn out on this. I want to keep going. I need to keep asking these questions. I need to keep learning. I need to keep listening. And so that's where I hope that the church is right now, that it's not going to be that we quickly forget about this as soon as the next thing happens, right? Then all of a sudden 2 years from now, it's like, oh yeah, we need to jump into this conversation again. So that's why even Antoine, I appreciate you and just some of the things that you're leading out in, because I've been watching you lead out in this before any of this stuff happened, right? You started these conversations, and that's why I even appreciated you so much, as just as a friend and a coworker. You've seen the importance of these conversations a year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, even before I met you, you know, and so I think that's super valuable.
Yeah. Well, thanks guys for letting me get a chance to just hopefully be helpful. We just want to be a resource. Yeah. And we don't want people to make the mistakes that we've made, you know? So, so thank you for allowing that opportunity.
Yeah. Appreciate your time today. We'll drop some of those resources that we talked about in the chat, in the comments below. That way you guys can have access to them and figure out where you can hunt down Antwuan some different spots. So the conversation. So appreciate everybody's time today. Have a good rest of your Friday or whatever day you're listening to this. So we'll catch you the next Friday conversation. We'll see you later.
Bye.